table, I'm going to ask that we actually really run through introductions today so everyone knows who's in the room. So we'll start with the table with Patricia. But there's no NOLA there. So
Hey Matt, where are the microphones? We need the microphones, otherwise we're not ever going to hear anybody. Are they on the podium? Okay.
For those of you at the table, just say who you are and your affiliation or lack thereof.
Okay, Patricia Carmody, Colorado Watershed Assembly.
Yeah.
Left Global, Barry Burgess, the Business Association.
John Sopian, Globeville, and I just want to say one thing, if I might. I see everybody drinking water, but in our heritage and Western tradition, I think it's time we have some damn whiskey around here. After all these
There we go. Yeah, let's roll it in.
Jim Garcia with Clínica PPA.
Kayla Birdsong with the Grow House.
Candy Sedevaca, Swansea resident.
Kelly Lead, Executive Director, Mayor's Office, the National Western Center.
Crystal Torres de Herrera, Deputy City Attorney. Jen Wellborn, Assistant City Attorney.
Pat Grant, National Western.
Maria Garcia Berry, co-facilitator.
Terrence Carroll, co-facilitator.
Albus Brooks, District 9, City Council. Juan Veloz, representando el IRI Swansea.
Juan Veloz representing Elyria and Swansea.
Anna Elizabeth Globeville.
Betty Graham, Swansea.
Tracy Weil, Rhino Art District.
Ann Hayes with Westfield, Midtown, and Elyria.
Drew Dutcher, Elyria and Swansea. Vernon Hill, Globeville.
Nancy Walsh, Denver Museum of Nature and Science.
Nolan Miguel, over here, everyone.
That's in the Swansea area. Sophia Bench, CU Denver. Megan Boydson, CU Denver.
Will Tucker, CU Denver.
Kay Rigo, CU Denver.
Noah Sossaman, CU Denver.
Gretel Qualingstad, CU Denver.
Gretchen Hallra, Deputy Director of the Mayor's Office of the National Western Center.
Eric Camarillo, CU Denver.
Josh Roberts, Assistant City Attorney.
Elizabeth Florida. Maria Campos.
Raimunda Cabral, Swansea.
Angelina Torres de Swansea. Virginia Calderón, Presidente de Swansea. Slavica Park with Focus Points.
David Torres, Elyria, Swansea. Brett Dole.
Will Chan, Deputy Director of Economic Mobility, NWC-CAC and National Western Center.
Marcy Locken with the National Western Center.
Patrick O'Keefe with the National Western Center.
Stephanie Reed with the National Western Center.
Good evening, Michael Sapp with the Mayor's Office of the National Western Center in North Denver, Cornerstone Collaborative Community Relations. Sorry about that.
Good evening, William Franklin, National Western Center Office. Matthew Zitton with CRL.
Baku Ipakawa, Blackburn.
Nancy Grandis Jones, JJJ Properties Globeville and Globeville Civic Partners.
Professor Rob Prince, University of Denver, Corbell School of International Studies, Emeritus.
Karen Nakundakari, National Western.
I think we missed someone. No.
Hi, I'm Conrad Olmeda. I just drove up from Colorado Springs to check out the meeting. So it's great.
Wow.
It's great.
And
Yola Miguel with the GES Coalition. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll go through our partner updates really quickly. Kelly Lee.
The only thing I would report out tonight is that obviously in addition to working through the framework agreement, the team in collaboration with our partners is working on the procurement strategy for the balance of this year and going into next. And that includes getting ready for a series of industry forums to engage industry on the approach and making sure that we're in alignment with obviously all the work that's going on in the city, but we'll be spending a lot of time getting ready for industry engagement around our procurement strategy.
And sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
Sure. Relative to arts and venues, one of the topics that came up last meeting as part of the special meeting was this idea around could we explore ways to accelerate the community investment fund. So Kent Rice, who heads up arts and venues, we chatted with him today and is open to having a discussion with they're actually going through a negotiation right now on their food and beverage provider for the convention center, but very open to talking about, or the Coliseum, sorry, about how they might participate or think about us in partnership with us on accelerating the community investment fund. We've also, Paul's not here tonight, but Paul and I talked about it after last meeting about how we might work together to look for creative ways to advance the community investment fund sooner.
There's no Paul Andrews tonight, but
there is Pat Grant.
But there is Pat Grant, who's the chairman of the board of the Western Stock Show Association, our esteemed leader.
Terrence, pardon me. Terrence, thanks very much. I'm really at risk standing in for Paul Andrews, so I will pass this on. Welcome to everybody. Delighted you're here. Interested to hear the comments, questions, feedback.
We don't have a report from CSU because Chancellor Tony Frank is getting the River Award as we speak right now on the big annual Greenway Foundation piece. So he is getting an award. So no one from CSU is here tonight. So sorry about that.
I actually thought they were getting ready to beat CU on Friday, but sorry. Nancy.
So we're really excited about things being accelerated in other ways that we can participate here in the neighborhoods. And I wanted, of course, to talk about the Triceratops. Is there anyone here who doesn't know that a Triceratops was found in Thornton?
Right.
Everybody knows this, right? It's been on CNN, it's everything. So we've been up there digging it up. And on Tuesday morning, it's going really fast. It's in the sand, 66 million years old. They just found part of the frill. They found the 2 horns. The first day they found one. Yesterday I was out there, we found another one. And the beak, it's incredible. And we're going to be doing a live broadcast because it is a construction site and people can't go there. And we particularly want to broadcast into the schools. So Tuesday morning at 11 a.m., it's really simple. People just need a computer. We'll broadcast live into the schools. They'll be able to ask the scientists questions. And of course, we're reaching out to Garden Place in Swansea to see if they would like to participate in that. And if you guys want to watch, you can hook up to Facebook Live at 11 a.m. on Tuesday morning.
History Colorado. Do we have anyone from History Colorado?
Is there anyone here from History Colorado?
Nope.
Next on our agenda is the discussion of the follow-up discussion on the framework agreement. But before we do that, I want to read an email that the mayor just sent regarding to myself and Maria regarding a GES representative on the National Western Center Authority. He says, I'd like to extend my thanks for convening 2 special meeting sessions with CAC members to review the NWC framework agreement documents with the city team. Our team will continue to be available for questions as that agreement moves to the city council process, and we continue important public dialogue about the future of the National Western Campus and fulfillment of our commitment to 2C voters. Looking ahead to the selection of board members for the NWC Authority, I'd also like to solicit input directly from the GES community on the desired qualifications of the GES resident board member. He's requesting that we obtain feedback from the members of the CAC this evening, and once he's received our list of preferred qualifications, he'd like to sit down with CAC representatives to discuss candidate names they'd like to recommend. Sincerely, Michael B. Hancock, Mayor of Denver.
We'll get this out to all of you guys in writing. We just got it like 10 minutes ago. So we'll make sure the CAC gets it and it's available for consumption. Then we'll have to work with the mayor's office to figure out a time where it would be appropriate for us to sit down with the mayor and what time we should meet with the mayor on that. So with that, let's start. Obviously, the next thing on the agenda is follow-up discussion on the framework agreement. We have received, AE, if it's okay for me to say, you sent to us this afternoon a series of questions you would like to go through, but let's open it up for discussion for other members as we go through the framework agreement. That's the purpose of this meeting. We obviously had the Ludi committee on Tuesday. It feels like the week has gone by really fast. We also had, there was an INC meeting that happened on Saturday where the INC sent a letter out requesting more time and more explanation. I think both AE and Drew were there so they can elaborate on that. So Terrence and I are going to try to keep some structure to this, but it's really kind of a free-flowing discussion. I think Nancy sent us some emails asking whether we're going to have follow-up discussion on this in terms of the framework agreement. So with that, we'd like to open up to discussion first, and then we can get into specific questions that members have. So who wants to? You know what? The other thing we have on the agenda is the branding presentation. Both Erica and Marcy are aware that if we need the time for the framework agreement, it's not time pressing. And Michael Sapp does have an NDCC report. How long are you?
2 to 5 minutes.
So you want to do it now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, can we skip that, do NDCC, and then let's devote the rest of the time to the framework agreement.
So just real brief, Tim Sandoz, the new executive director for NDCC, sends his regards. His mother is celebrating her 88th birthday tonight, so he is spending time with her. Just 3 updates from NDCC, some really good celebratory projects. One in Globeville out in Argo Park, we just completed the final phase 2 and phase 3 for Argo Park Loop. So a lot of the folks who are part of that process, I see Maria Campos here and some others who are part of that Argo Loop is complete. The second one in Dunham Park, just completed that project about 2 weeks ago. We're actually going to go out with a couple of community members to begin to look at adding additional walking paths in Dunham Park. The final update is around 47th and York. We are kicking off our 30% design for that project, and so you'll see information about that as we get ready to transition into more public involvement. The last thing is NDCC will have an open house on Wednesday, September 20th at Swansea Elementary School. If you're not on our distribution list or you're interested in learning more about NDCC, I'll be in the corner after the meeting. Thank you. Nancy.
At the last meeting, I asked if we could see what the work plan was for the Golan project as an activity, the 17 million, and Tim Sandoz said that would be provided, but I haven't seen it.
Let me check on that.
Great.
I'll take a note back and take it back to the team.
Emily has all that.
And, okay, so Councilman Brooks' office has that information. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, who wants to kick off on the framework agreement?
And I'm assuming Maria will capture these questions.
Yes, we are actually taping, as we always do. We're taping this discussion, so we will do that. So who wants to kick off? Come on, guys, let's not be shy here.
Maybe we should have Drew maybe.
Do the INC wrap-up? Yeah, okay. So Drew, why don't you give us some context of the INC meeting on Saturday?
If anyone's not familiar with the Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation group, it is basically an umbrella group of registered neighborhood organizations. We have, I believe, about 80 RNOs that are members of it. I'm currently a member of it, the Elyria Swansea Neighborhood Association. I'm also a delegate at large. And so they, once a month, they have a very well-attended, very robust zoning and planning committee meeting. And this has been going on for many years, and we have addressed many hot topics in the city at these meetings. And I felt, being a director and a representative, I felt that basically anyone can bring forward issues that they feel are important in the city. They don't have to be strictly limited to zoning and planning. But I emailed the president and I said, I think that this should be a topic. Can you give me 10 minutes at Saturday's Inc., we call it the ZAP meeting, Zoning and Planning Committee. And I basically just presented, I brought the binder that I have and told everybody I had read it several times. Just joking. I mean, I guess, just trying to lighten things up. And I also presented Kelly your memorandum, which outlines the schedule. And we sort of just as a group went through this. This was, I believe, August 25th, 6th, I think. And they basically were presented with the schedule, which going forth would be on Tuesday, a LUTI meeting, Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure meeting of City Council, a mayor and council meeting September 5, which would be the next week. September 7th, filing the ordinance for this contract, which begins a 30-day period in which City Council has to approve or disapprove of this contract. I was just trying to make sure that people understood this process that is going through. The role of the mayor to negotiate. Per our city charter, the mayor can negotiate contracts, but City Council has only the power to approve or reject. They are not able to amend this in any way. So this was presented, and I think it's probably true, that this is pretty much a done deal. I also explained that we were able to insert 3 words into the contract. I think that was "and resides in the qualifications for the community director, one of the 11 directors, the so-called community representative. So September 7th, the ordinance is planned to be filed. September 11th is the first City Council reading. September 18th is City Council's second reading, during which they will vote. So I think we had a discussion in AE. I want you to add to this if you want. It was felt that that compressed schedule really did not allow for really much public debate on this, on such a huge document that was at least for the next 50 years and possibly for the next 100 years. So we discussed, I think, about 10 minutes, INC. I think that there were about 40, 45 people there, and one of the members, I think it was Michael Henry, suggested that we ask for a 1-month delay in this process so that the public could get up to speed on this document before City Council votes. So that's kind of where we left it, and a letter by INC was composed and written by our president, J.J. Neiman. I have the letter on my phone, which if I had thought of it, I would have brought some copies from it, but it basically said that we are asking for a 1-month delay in the filing of this ordinance. So that's kind of where INC left it. AE, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I'm a delegate to the Denver Inc. from Globeville Cares, and I've attended the Inc. Zoning and Planning Commission for many years, and I do think that group has been phenomenally, it's educated me. I didn't know the difference between, well, I don't know, I can't think of the technical terms now, and mental blocks against it all. But anyway, I can concur with most of what Drew is saying about what occurred. I think the discussion actually ended up being a much longer one than people anticipated. It was a good discussion. There was some specific questions. I think Alan Gass, is that how you say his last name?
Gass, yeah.
Alan, who's a revered member of the urban Bill Denver community, asked for a description of where were the residential constituencies involved in the conversations leading up to this, what appears to be a final document. And it was described that there wasn't a lot of, let's just call it, interface conversations involved in it. A lot of it happened behind closed doors and for reasons that I personally think have some necessity when you're dealing with legal things and things like that. However, there's a real desire to have conversations where influences that can be had will be had. And I'm not convinced that the language cannot change at the city council level. I recognize that the legal negotiations that go on between the equity partners are profoundly difficult. There's a lot at stake. It's way over my head, and I'm pretty tall. And so I think there's a lot that I don't think we as constituencies should assume and not voice if we have particular suggestions. And there was, so I think the EXAP meeting created a good launch into that this is something that people throughout the city can pay more attention to, especially as neighborhood constituencies. And so hopefully there's some folks here from that. And then I just want to put in add a framework relative to the Ludi meeting, which followed. The people know what the Ludi meeting is that Drew mentioned. There was a discussion about the Denver Inc. request for an extension, for a 30-day extension, and it was responded to, and I'm not going to try and paraphrase you, Kelly, because if you want to insert, I'll just say that the gist of what I understood from what the NWC office's response to extension not being merited was that this has been a very long process. There's been a lot of development in the master planning process, the public meetings, many things that have gone on over the last years, and that sort of knew it was coming kind of a thing. And then there was this document. I have, and forgive me totally if I've misrepresented how you're presenting it. I'm trying to be really brief with that. You can correct me. I feel differently. I feel that with and this is, I'm going to go ahead because I don't want this list of questions to overwhelm people, but I also don't want it to be, I don't want it to be neglected, nor do I want it to be the centerpiece. But I think a lot of the questions from reading as much as I could through this have to do with the community representation and a lot of things that have to do with what I consider sort of the other side of the legal jargon that jargon is not an honorable enough word, but what I'd like us to look at as the CAC and members of the neighborhoods are, how can we find entry points into the developmental instruments of the board of directors for the permanent authority that can influence the values and implementation, the mission, and the relationship of this project to the constituencies in the neighborhoods that are most effective, and then like an onion going out to the constituencies and to the rest of the city. So a lot of these questions have to do with how do we, I don't know, memorialize might be the word people use, mechanisms such that we know that the neighborhood interests are on an equal level, the way I think of it, with the agricultural innovation mission of this project. So that's the framework of these questions. They're very clear citations within, and I'd like to introduce them as a means of conversation and for people to use to surface more questions. So I think that so at any rate, if we were to have a 30, it's not just can we get another 30 days, it's what do we do with the 30 days. And to me, I'm hoping we can have a focus on the developmental instruments that have to become the working agreements of this authority that go beyond the law, because some of this, I learned from the last special meeting, a lot of the legal language is not meant to be exclusionary. It's meant to be specific to make sure that somebody else, it's meant to establish a framework so that more inclusionary things can happen, but at least the minimum is guaranteed. It's a bad way of saying it, but we need to make sure we reinforce the inclusionary along the way of every step of what the equal partnership is with the neighborhood aspirations and how we try and reach a consensus on that.
Is there a mic over there? Okay, we had to float around. So at the Ludi meeting also, just so that everybody knows, once the INC letter was received, which was received on Monday, Councilman Brooks did suggest at the Ludi meeting that we invite all of INC to this meeting, which we did, and we followed up on it. If there's anybody from INC, they can be welcome to join us at the table if they want in that aspect. So I don't think I heard anybody from INC who was here. But we did do that. We also sent them a link to all the documents, and also said that anybody who wanted a binder on their own would communicate back with us at CRL, and we'd make sure that we coordinate with the city to be able to do that. So I don't think we've had any specific requests, but we can do that at this end. So before we go to AE's questions and go through that, because that would be a good way of sort of going through some of this, anybody else have issues that they want to bring up? But John.
Not issues, but from what I just heard.
John.
Not that we can't hear you, John, but the air conditioning is complicated.
Part of me wants to say hell no, but I'll be nice. One of the concerns that I have, and I have a lot of respect for INC, having been one of the original motivators of forming that group many years back, but I also saw a lot of flaws. I never became a member, and the Globeville Civic Association at that time never became a registered active group with them. As I stated before, we have a political situation today that is very favorable to the effort that we've been a part of so far. And time is fleeting. And I would oppose any delay at this point. The INC, as I said, have a lot of respect for them. During the campaign for 2C, Kelly, myself, a couple other people, we went to that group, we made a presentation, we caught some heat, but they unanimously supported the effort. And we thank them for that. At that point, we said that if they wish to have any more input, feel free to come to our meeting, whatever. I feel that we put a lot of work into this, and it's time to move forward.
Candy?
With all due respect, John, I disagree, and I think it was really problematic at the committee meeting this week. Some of us here attended that meeting, and when this letter was read by Councilman Brooks to the committee, Mr. Lead here responded to some questions in the letter, specifically about the decision-making authority of the CAC. And Mr. Lee said that the CAC had decision-making authority, and I recall having that very explicit conversation about whether or not the CAC had decision-making authority. And I don't think that if the CAC had decision-making authority, we would have come to a structure where over 50% of the people on the authority are mayorally appointed. 8 out of the 12 people are appointed by the mayor, and that doesn't achieve any equity in decision-making amongst 4 parties. And I say 4 parties because the community is a party in this. So I disagree that this was discussed and worked on. I don't think the authority is a reflection of what our initial commitment was, and that was to equity for all the stakeholders involved.
So the only thing I would respond to is when I was asked directly about what the decision-making role of the CAC was I said it was advisory. I never said decision-making.
It's recorded.
Yeah, and I said advisory.
Right, that's right. Nancy has a question back here.
Thank you. I, too, have issues with the process of what went on. I'm an alternate. I did not attend the 2 special meetings about the framework agreement, but I did go through most of it, looking for the community connection part, and had some questions that I presented because we were asked to solicit questions and concerns. And I was really dismayed then to find out that those questions and concerns maybe were not discussed in the meeting or not decided upon. And my conclusion was that these meetings that were that you wanted CAC members to attend were really just to read the document and go along with the program. And so I found that really, I have to tell you, very disrespectful of our time. Now, so here we are with INC initiating this request to have more time so that there would be more public engagement, and I think especially from the GES community. AE has a list of questions. I had questions and concerns. Equity is a big deal, and my two concerns were about the community representation on the 11-member board. One person from GES nowhere gets to any equity, which was a big value for the city with the GO bond and distributing assets throughout the community. I don't think the membership on the board reflects the city value of equity, and I had suggested that there would be 3 directors from the community, 1 from the residents, 1 that would represent business, would come from the business community, and 1 that would come from a community organization or school. You know, so we do have more than 1 stakeholder group in GES. The other thing, I have many, I have real concerns about the Community Investment Fund being a roundup, and so I think that there's a whole nother issue to be talking about besides the governance, which is so critically important, but the Community Investment Fund. And I think that how that came about without community involvement, I don't know what community involvement took place to create that Community Investment Fund, but there's more than one way to do it besides having a roundup, which to me is a donation. And in the charity, and in the document there, I think we need to have what are the guidelines for the governance and administration of the Community Investment Fund before we sign off on anything, because that is a huge, huge piece for the GES community, which we have been waiting for community benefit. And finally, to go along with that, I just want to share something that when the National Western Center, the text amendment and zoning went before the planning board, there were several members, NWC-CAC and community members that attended that. And neighborhood concerns were being testified, or, you know, we were talking about neighborhood concerns. And the planning board gave their approval for the National Western Center rezoning with a condition. And here is what the condition read: that the City Council acknowledge and address the concerns expressed by the neighborhood stakeholders with regards to neighborhood involvement in governance and community equity. So I think this is really pretty significant and not to be forgotten, and that this statement, this condition, be evidenced in this process and in the framework agreement. Thank you.
Hey.
I'm going to respond to a couple things that are directly related to what you were saying, Nancy, and then maybe try and focus some of it back toward the center and get to some questions. At the last meeting, just to correct one perception, in this community investment fund, it was clarified in discussion at the last meeting that roundup idea was not exclusionary. That's simply an example. It's a vehicle in that document to set the principle that where there is going to be participation from the commerce community in the National Western toward nourishing that fund. But that is not exclusionary. That is an example, and there's going to be a lot of discussion, and there's other ideas on the table, one of which I'm a strong advocate for, and have been the revenue sharing off of licensing and such from intellectual property. So I want us to really recognize that and put it to rest. Part of the problem is the same questions keep coming up because it's hard for us to follow all this. But I'm very confident there's going to be a cornucopia of ideas. We have to have the mechanism, and that protects the principle in my mind. And it was the simplest example that the crew that wrote this could come up with that was non-invasive on territory like intellectual property, which is a huge discussion. So I just want to be clear, that is not exclusive of any other ideas. Secondly, this discussion on the policies and the direction and the utilization of the Community Investment Fund is a germinal conversation. It was made very clear at that last meeting that no decisions have been made by those that have written this. This is going to be, the authority is going to be the fiscal sponsor. And that's going to be a challenge to us in the neighborhoods to overcome some of the inertia from, we have to figure out how the constituency, self-defined and whatever it is, has to figure out going forward how we make this happen. So I think we've got a conversation that's opening up there. So I just wanted to clarify those two things. And I want to say that the majority, listening to your very valid concept, reminder about the caveat on that, the majority of the questions on what I have gleaned as lack of clarity or maybe a little rethinking have to do specifically with the GES constituencies being a peership within the agreement. And so I really want to make sure that, I think some of these questions are going to help in that and may bring other people's questions out. And it has to do with specific sections, specific things in specific areas where wording can have impact. And it can also have impact in the complementary documents that become policy documents for the administration of the authority coming out of the legal documents like the bylaws and the agreements and that kind of a thing. So I think what our challenge is where are the entry points right now? If we have a legal document, which I would like to get past City Council myself, I want the mechanism to be put in place. I'm with John, and let's get it moving. I also feel like we need to get a clearer idea, and that's what I was looking for in trying to put these questions in, a clear idea. Where is the voice of the GES constituency? We did discuss, but this was the last thing. We did discuss, they did mention, they had on the list of the questions your questions, the 3 representatives. We did discuss that, and there was a general consensus of those attending that we wanted what's it called, the local area to be a resident. There's some trade-offs with that. My feeling is unless we have guaranteed residents on there in the 6 appointments that the mayor has, et cetera, or the CSU or whatever, that unless we guarantee ours as a resident, we're not going to have any residents. There's that exposure. But there's room for lots of discussion on that. And we also agreed that on this agenda would be a discussion of the criteria for the representatives. So I think we've got the table laid for people. And the suggestion I said is I'd love to see, I wish it could be somebody who's lived here at least 3 years, has children, is involved in the schools in the GES area, and plans on being here for at least 5 years. So that's a suggested criteria, something to talk about. Okay, so I think we have the framework, from this framework, and I again don't think I want to give up on if there's some legal wording improvement. If it can get through the equity partners, it can get to city council. Or I'm not closing my mind on that.
Vern has a question. AE, can you send that down?
This is just a very quick question, AE, on what your statement was. On this roundup agreement, is it real specific in the contract that this is discretionary?
It says, it uses the term may. Okay, it says, but here's what it is. As I understand it, now the people that wrote it, really, I'm a lay person, I just read it with my bad vision and velvet glasses. So, no, let me say what I
look at
63. What it says is that
What's the page number?
63.
63, page, give it the tab.
60 tab 5,
Tab
5, page 63, which is the framework agreement is tab 5.
So here's how it's got communicated to this layperson, and it can be fine-tuned. I understand it to mean that all of the all of the people who have commerce, whether they're renters or whatever, in the NWC are obligated to make this available at the point of sale. Correct. So that it is not a demand, but they're obligated to make it available that people will round up to the nearest dollar, whatever it's determined to be. It could be the nearest $1 million as far as I'm concerned. But that this time there's no designation other than that it will go into the community investment fund, yet to be determined. So it essentially sets the precedent for everybody who comes onto this for commerce being aware that there is some stewardship in their prosperity back into the neighborhoods. It's a community investment fund, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, so
they're obligated to make people aware of it and nobody is forced.
Vern, on parent B, on page 63, that talks about the community investment fund on the second sentence. The authority shall, comma, at a minimum, require that all vendors and retail establishments on the campus provide an opportunity for customers to round up their payments and collect such donations for the benefit. So it is not discretionary that the retailers can do it or not. Obviously, it's discretionary on the customer side as whether they do it or not. That's an election. But it is not discretionary for the retailers to not do it. They have to do it.
Well, I understand that, but it doesn't set it. They're just doing that whole deal with the golf course down there off of Santa Fe Drive.
Right.
All right, Overland Golf
Yeah,
Course.
right.
All right, and as part of their agreement with the city is that this investment fund, okay, will be added $1 to every ticket. Okay, that's very specific. This is open-ended here. And when somebody not from this group here reads this in the next 5 years, they're going to go by this like it's law. And they're going to be very specific in following this, and I've gone through this with the neighborhood plan already. Because they go back to the neighborhood plan because these weren't the people that put that plan together. And then they read it and they say, okay, this is exactly the way it reads and this is exactly how we're doing it. So as a contract, and as a person that has sat in the courtroom and had to deal with some of this stuff before, all right, it is very specific, and this is not specific, it's too open-ended. And all we're asking is it's more clearer and more specific in what benefits are going to come to the community and to the neighborhood, okay? And not just left open-ended for someone to kind of say, yeah, well, maybe we'll do this down the road, or maybe we might do that, okay? Your stuff in here that pertains to the money parts of it are very, very, very specific, okay? And what I see here is I see a situation to where when it comes to these kind of agreements here with the community and stuff, They're kind of a little bit open-ended, and it gives me an uneasiness about the entire situation.
So let me ask some questions in terms of clarity. First of all, once the Community Investment Fund is triggered, and as Kelly just pointed out with arts and venues, first of all, the authority doesn't take over all of this until phases 1 and 2 are completed. But both partners, in fact, Paul Andrews said this the other day at meetings, and we'll say it again, the stock show is open to start this rounding up earlier. The stock show has more flexibility than the city does because the city has contracts, which is what Kelly's comment was about arts and venues. I think it's very different to compare a 3-day event that happens once a year with one contract with an event that has 365 days of hopefully programming. I don't think you can necessarily say that every event that will happen at the stock show will have, or the National Western Center, sorry, I'm correcting my lingo here, will be able to absorb a $1 a ticket venue, because some of those are going to be very sensitive to, if CSU is having a water conference that is, they're trying to do X and Y and trying to get people out there, it may not be necessarily the right thing to do to be able to do that. So I understand what you're saying about the Overland piece, but that's one contract, one event. This authority is being created for the purposes of programming 365 days a year. So there'll be multiple contracts over the term of it. Not every contract, I mean, the stock show may be able to observe $1 ticket, right, added on, but other events may not be able to do that. So that's the issue why it's being written so broadly with some clarity to be able to do that. But I just want to make sure that you understand that. I just want to clarify that the investment fund is not, the rounding up is not discretionary. It has to happen once the rounding up has to happen.
Okay, I'm just going to speak to my own opinion in reference to this, that we locked into the dollar, but that was used as an example.
Right, I understand what you're
Okay,
saying.
a percentage. Okay, the percentage that we could all agree on that would be fair to the National Western Stock Show and anybody else that'd be involved in it. Okay, so I just would like to see something more of a solid portion or a solid way to have that in there and not be in a situation to where it is left to some vendor to make sure that their people remember to say, sir, would you like to round this up? You know, as they're checking people out every time they do it. So that's all I'm saying. It's something a little more concrete and a little more stable if we're going to have this thing. And let's design it in a manner that's going to work for everybody.
David?
Now, I asked a long time, but is it going to be just on food items?
No, it's on all retail.
Let's say they sell a tractor for $49,000. You say you want to round it up to 50, so would it be something like that, or boots and hats?
It's all vendors.
Everything.
It's all vendors. It does not describe or differentiate between food or equipment or boots or hats or anything.
Buildings, portable buildings and metal buildings and everything?
Everybody who's a vendor
Okay.
will be required to give the option of rounding up.
This will work.
And can I just add, certain, John, this came up at our last meeting, and first of all, if you think about 365-day-a-year programming, there is likely to be more events on this campus that are not ticketed than there are ticketed. That's one. And the whole premise of a roundup, if you go and do the research, and we're happy to talk through and share with you the research, is that what's the one thing that when folks come on this campus, whether you're a young person, a family, or here with your grandkids, you're going to buy water, you're going to buy a t-shirt, you're going to buy something. The retail has the broadest net to cast in capturing dollars. The other thing I would tell you in our research is that companies that have done this have two things have happened. One, it's part of their social commitment as a company. It's part of their corporate culture of giving something back, of being bigger than something else. The second is the retention of those employees is significantly higher for companies that are doing this, both in the training side as well as the retaining side, because they also feel like they're part of something larger. And the reality is, the way this is going to work is, if you look at the only role for the authority is to be the fiscal agent. It is the responsibility of the folks that live in these neighborhoods, this group, to define the programs or projects for which those dollars will go. And that's part of the storytelling that will have to be done as part of getting people excited to visit this campus over the course of a year to tell that story. So this is a partnership between the authority and the communities to make that happen.
Candy.
John.
There's candy and there's somebody in the audience.
One of the things I think that, and it struck me initially, the folks that wrote this, I think did a tremendous job. I stated that before. I want to really initiate that. The open-endedness of it and the non-specific items that you referred to, Vern, I think those are very advantageous to us as neighborhood people. And it behooves us to take advantage of this opportunity that I regarded as the best opportunity to come our way in the past 100 years. The most important thing that I see is that it's going to place the responsibility on the residents of the three areas to start showing our smarts. And we will come up with a program designed after, I'm sure, a lot of haggling. It's going to happen, a lot of it. And that's part of our obligation as being residents involved in these processes. We've discussed this the last couple weeks, and I thought that we'd arrived at some definite notions to move ahead on. Specifically, remember saying it was a resident, not a business person, not an agency person, not a school, heaven forbid someone from a church. I'm being funny now. But a resident. And as long as I've known the National Western, and Pat can vouch this, resident have never had any input whatsoever. And this is the first in 100 years, and it behooves us to take advantage of it. And Pat and I go back a few years, and we've seen some cooperation in the past, but this is the best thing to come our way, and it shouldn't be delayed any further.
You know, the thing that inspires me is that I round up all the time at the grocery store that people get to give their money their way instead of mandatory. And this is what people like, is to give their money their way. And like John said, this will work. We need to do this. Thank you.
Guys, we got, here. Yeah, thank you.
Bueno, yo tengo varias preguntas.
I have several questions.
Como residente de Globio, yo pregunto, ¿están hablando de un grupo de 11 personas donde va a ser una sola persona residente?
So as a resident of Global, I'm asking, are you talking about a group of 11 people where only one person is going to be
Required to be a resident.
Una persona va a ser requerida para ser residente?
There's no, I think it's important to understand that there's no restrictions on the mayor of Denver appointing someone out of his group that may be either residents, business owners, or involved with an organization. The one requirement that it has is that there must be a resident.
Ok. Y otra de las cosas es, ¿están hablando de un fondo comunitario?
Sí.
And the other thing is, are you talking about a community fund?
Entonces, si es un fondo comunitario, están hablando también de programas. ¿Qué tipo de programas?
So if it's a community fund, you're also talking about programming. So what kind of programs?
Y también, ¿qué tanto va a ser lo que la comunidad se va a beneficiar de los programas que van a haber?
And also how much the community is going to benefit from those programs that are going to be there.
So I think it's fair to say, and Kelly, Crystal, and Jen can correct me, but it is fair to say that the criteria for where the community fund will spend its resources and time is yet to be decided with engagement with the community.
I'm sorry. can you
Oh,
say
sorry.
that?
Well,
It's up to the community.
it's a community fund.
Ustedes,
Right. I'm sorry.
It's up to
The authority is actually the fiscal agent. It's the community who will
That's right.
dictate where the money will be spent.
Ok, entonces si la comunidad va a ser la que va a decidir cómo va a gastar el dinero, cómo van a llegar a la comunidad para que la comunidad participe en
So
este
if
proyecto.
the community is the one who's going to decide how money is going to spend, how are you going to involve the community so the community in turn can decide how money is going to be spent?
You guys, Pastor Kelly?
It's a good question, and I've asked Councilwoman Ortega and Councilman Brooks and others to facilitate a discussion of how that's done, who needs to be involved, but the whole intent.
It's our business.
It's your business.
Yes, that's our business.
You guys decide how you want to convene, who needs to be in the room, and what programming or projects are determined. That's up to you.
Ok, entonces nosotros podemos ser parte y estar enterados de
Es nuestra
cómo lo van a hacer.
obligación.
Porque a usted habló también enfrente de los concejales de una cocina comercial.
So I guess then, it's on us to decide how that's going to be spent. And also I want to bring up that you mentioned this in front of council people about a community kitchen.
Y cuando se puso en la boleta de votaciones de que apoyaran para recibir el bono, nosotros tomamos parte para apoyar este bono que ustedes recibieron. Nosotros estuvimos tocando puertas y pidiendo a la gente que votara por esto. Entonces,
Because we were supporting you in the 2C for the bond. In that initiative, we were knocking on doors and we were doing our part to make sure that this would happen.
entonces me gustaría que esto quedara bien asentado en documento para que nosotros tomáramos parte también, porque en ese tiempo también se nos ofreció que íbamos a tener una posibilidad de participar en ventas o cocina comercial aquí o capacitaciones también de negocio.
So I just want to make sure, that gets documented and that it's in writing, that we're going to be able to have the opportunity for that kitchen and also to be able to have other opportunities to sell things here.
Yo sé que a lo mejor no se pueda tomar en cuenta como vivienda para apoyar con vivienda, pero si apoyan con negocios, con oportunidades económicas, nos van a soportar algo más de las preocupaciones que tenemos.
So I understand that maybe you cannot support initiatives like housing, but I think that the fact that you're supporting employment generation could definitely help us.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I want to be clear is the Community Investment Fund and the dollars that we're talking about here that will be generated, again, the programming and projects of how those dollars are allocated by the authority is determined by you. The kitchen idea is one that is separate and apart from and in addition to the Community Investment Fund. So the idea that there's a commercial kitchen for the community in collaboration with our partners CSU and others to help start businesses is on top of the Community Investment Fund. I mean, the exciting thing about a campus of this size is there are going to be, the intent should be a range of opportunities, be it school-age kids, families, parents, whatever, to engage where you're comfortable or where you'd like to engage on the campus. And then outside the campus, I've heard the idea of spending money on the land trust. If that's what this community decides to use those dollars for, put it in the land trust. That's for you to decide.
John?
I just wanted to reinitiate that it's our business to take care of, and further than that, it's our obligation. Because we, as Maria said, we went to the neighborhood and we knocked on doors and asked them to vote for 2C so that we could have these possibilities in the future. And it's coming to the point now where we're not only facing an opportunity, it's an obligation for us to see this thing through. That nobody feels that they've been lied to, and nobody feels that anyone got the rug pulled out from under them. Everything's on the up and up, and it's time to move forward. Thank you.
Hey. Oh.
I want to address a few things that have come up. I'm not interested in haggling later for anything. We were promised a seat at the table. We were promised equity, and that needs to happen right now because, frankly, why should we trust the mayor to appoint residents who are not that single required resident? Also, why do we need to create an authority when it's essentially mayor controlled and an extension of the city? What is the point of creating an authority for that? I think that it's not, the roundup is not acceptable because I don't think that it's the consumer's burden to pay for the damage that has been caused to this community and is being called a benefit to this community. I think that nobody considered whether or not the residents or this community could absorb the cost of this redevelopment. The people were not asked if they could absorb the cost of a new loan when they had to finance new loans for houses when they were displaced from houses they had paid off. Nobody asked them if they could absorb those costs. So I don't think that we should prioritize the businesses and their ability to absorb these costs when nobody asked us if we could. This is the city's responsibility. And if that's a loss for the partners involved in this project, when a business can't absorb those costs, so be it. It was a loss for us to have to displace the people we've displaced and lose what we're losing. I think that we need to seriously address an article that came out in the Huffington Post yesterday about this becoming Olympic Village and this being redeveloped for an Olympic bid. That's very concerning, and I think that if we're talking about these add-ons for the Community Investment Fund, we should seriously be considering what was in that article and making sure that we're proactive about it.
AE.
I would like at this point to put one of the questions from this list on the table because I think it has specifically to do with implementation, and that is question number 11 that has to do with tab 7, page 3 in the bylaws, page 3 of 25. And it is a little confusing because there's you go to tab 7 and look, don't be fooled, it looks like it's page 2 at first, but it's page 3 of 25. Article 6, section 6.02D. It reads, one director shall serve as an appointee of the mayor and shall demonstrate a strong commitment to and understanding of the economic, cultural, educational, and social circumstances of residents and businesses of the surrounding Globeville, Elyria, and Swansea neighborhoods. This will be known as the local area director. Now, this was the specific appointment which was designated on consensus to be a resident, which the mayor has now stepped up and to support. Okay, now my question is, number 11, how can the commitments required of the local area director be generalized as an overriding aspirational wisdom, which I define as values plus insight required of all members of the board? Part of the discussion of the last meeting, and this is reinforcing part of what Candy Cedabach is saying. Part of the conversation in the last meeting that I felt was very important, a special meeting on this, was that the appointments by the equity partners should have as a consideration that the mayor and the CSU and WSSA will strive and receive the recommendations from the neighborhoods and anybody to find people that embrace the mandate that this is a partnership with the neighborhoods. Within the whole design of this is, in the NDCC, is to reinforce the aspirational neighborhood plans with the master plan for the National Western Stock Show with some accountabilities. Things such as the kitchen to create an opportunity for mentoring and incubating commerce has been a part of the conversation ad infinitum. But I want to propose two specific concrete mechanisms in response partly to what Vern is saying. I propose these two things, and if we want to make a motion and vote on it, that's fine. One, I propose that the CAC require the first meeting of the board of the authority to have on its agenda the initial discussion of how we can broaden the ways that revenue can be generated through this project into the Community Investment Fund. Because this roundup is, to me, to prime the pump. It sets the precedent. In this legal document, it can never be taken away. Well, I mean, I suppose it could, but, it would have to be the equity partners and the city, and would have to agree that, this is something that sets the precedent for us to get creative and find many ways. And I'll tell you something, I'm going to be out there really marketing to get people to do that roundup. Now, I don't think that this Community Investment Fund should cure the problems of the neglected neighborhoods, but I sure as heck think it's a forward-looking thing. It could be scholarships, it could be all kinds of things. It could be, sending some of the, maybe we can make it a goal to pay the college education of everybody that's in 80216 for the second or third generation. We can do so many things, but we have to set the mechanism. Lastly, I think that what we have to do is we do have to be vigilant. But I do think that we need to be respected a little bit more. So my second proposal is, trust us with the money. In the design here, there is a seed, as I understand it now, please forgive me, I'm a lay person, this is how I read it, okay? As I understand it, the City of Denver, WSSA, and who's the third, CSU are advancing some money to fund the authority, which will be paid back as the money from our various public streams comes in, the RTA, etc. And again, correct me. But I would like to make a motion that the National Western Center as a project advance $500,000 to $1 million to seed a community investment fund, and that the first step, and that it can be paid back if you want by something coming out of the various ways we generate revenue over time, and that if we want to set the mechanism in play, we can find another fiscal agent. I'm not sure how this would work, but that part of that be money that will be objectively used to do outreach to 100% of the residents and residential property owners and interior businesses of the Global Leary Swanson area neighborhood into a series of public meetings for the specific purpose of tutoring us into the mechanism of this, asking for ideas, with no competition between community groups, RNOs, nonprofits, or anything. The validity is in anybody could walk in that door with an envelope that says, this is my name, I'm in 80216, or this is put some money there, let's start it off to get the conversation going and get this cornucopia of ideas on the table, because it's going to take some time. And I do not want us to wait till the buildings are built and the cash registers are open in 3, 5, 6 years or whatever. I want us to do this now, because that'll prepare us for the marketplace. So I propose that.
Is there any support?
Thoughts?
So Nancy has a question.
Nancy.
Or Councilwoman Ortega.
Hi, everybody. I'm Debbie Ortega. I was at the last meeting. We had talked about some of these topics. One of the things that I had talked about was the Coliseum, because of the fact that, and the neighborhood being able to have access to utilizing the Coliseum to generate some revenue to book a host of different kinds of events, to start generating some other revenue now, because it's going to be some time before those buildings will be on site and we're going to start seeing any of that revenue that would potentially be part of the roundup. You know, I'm skeptical about how much it's actually going to generate, and that's you know, real money to the neighborhood. It's part of why I push the issue. If you guys look at what the city of Denver did with the Stapleton site, there was $300 million of tax increment financing in that project. Yes, these are different dollars, they're still public monies. So when you're looking at public dollars, you look at what is the community benefit. In that case, we got affordable housing. There were 8 lots set aside. We got parks. You know, there were a host of other community benefits. There are schools over there now. There are some new fire stations on the site. Now, not all of those were funded with the tax increment financing dollars. Some of those were funded by the city's general fund. But that was a genuine commitment to give back to the community, not just the Stapleton community, but the adjacent Park Hill community as well. And I think the investment back into the community needs to be significant so that you're beginning to see some of those benefits come back to the community immediately, not having to wait for all the buildings to be built. And so, you know, we're hearing lots of different ideas and recommendations. The one I threw out was the Coliseum, and Crystal and I have made a commitment to sit down and meet and have the arts and venues people talk with us about how quickly we can begin to look at programming stuff in that building as yet one additional way to start generating some dollars, create the opportunities for the women from Comal to run the concessions in the building when we are looking at what kinds of things to have happening out of that building, whether it's, you know, the creative sectors, which includes a whole gamut of folks from performing arts to, you know, the arts and crafters, you name it. I mean, I know we've got one person from the community now that has a food truck. So, you know, I think there are some other ways and opportunities to look at how we do this that generates money today, and not waiting for everything else to be in place for that revenue to be generated.
I just have a direct response to that, and part of it is that, and I'm Gretchen again from the National Western Center office. So part of the response to that, Kelly mentioned in the beginning of this meeting, in that both the National Western, Paul Andrews, and we sat down with Kent Rice today. So we kind of jumped on it after the last meeting. And both are willing to look at ways to put the roundup in advance and not have to wait for the authority. So there are a number of follow-up conversations that need to happen, but Kent even offered that as they're doing their contract negotiations on the Coliseum, with Aramark had been the provider, that they'd be willing to make that a contract term, that be enabled. But the second piece that Kelly did not mention is that when we approached Kent with how can we leverage the Coliseum and the use of the Coliseum as a community asset based on what you had proposed at the last meeting, which is to look at how to fit in additional events around the current schedule and programming. He actually was surprised that he'd had this conversation, some brainstorming meetings with Jocelyn Hiddle at CSU, and ideas like a community, and they were community-focused ideas, not necessarily revenue generation, but he was open to both immediately, and they just hadn't progressed those discussions. And I think part of it is just the organizational piece that AE was talking about. It's a lot of work to do the organization. I think that though the framework agreement provides the bandwidth, the decision-making to the community, the fact that it's a partnership and the city should support the community when they ask and how they ask, I think is really important. But that kind of immediate access to the Coliseum he was open to it right now, and at only the cost of the events and trying to find the cheapest cost to deliver events, the cheapest cost possible to deliver those events. So that's available, and I think his next suggestion was to have Tad sit down with the team you mentioned, and start to map that out. So requests are welcome. I also want to add, and AE helped with this, gosh, maybe a year and a half ago, the stock show offered a similar proposal. We actually mapped out areas and did a tour of the facilities that would be available for use. Free rent, but just at the cost of operating the event, whatever is needed. So both of those facilities are up and available for events now. I mean the stock show, the current stock show facilities north of the highway, the Coliseum complex that's operated by the National Western, and the Coliseum that is operated by Arts and Venues of the city. And I brought an extra packet that this event programming subcommittee we had up and running for a number of months, and it produced a final proposal from Paul's team about what these events are, how to book them, that they're available. There are, I think, 6 facilities we looked at and we toured. So I brought an extra copy of that. I can also send it to Maria to send out by email.
Is it on the CAC website? I thought it was.
I do believe that Liz posted it at one point too, but I just brought a hard copy. And then Kent is ready to, we just need the ideas and the organization, and the city's here to help facilitate that.
Maria, we have Nancy.
Yep, Nancy, and then Tracy.
Okay, thank you. I think it's interesting that we're having all this discussion and different ideas coming forth about the Community Investment Fund. And I think we should have been, the community should have been involved. It would have been great to have the community involved in generating ideas, because it's in the presentation on the Community Investment Fund in June at this meeting, it didn't say that there were other ideas. There was a lot about the roundup and other communities that had roundups with $1 million. What was advertised and, in the Denver Post, okay, and Denverite, who's ever, doing outreach on this, $58,000 initially, or that was a possibility coming from the stock show. So I think that through tonight we are seeing that that the community does have other ideas. The roundup is fine, but not as the only thing. And that was how it is presented. I have an idea. Use marijuana tax monies. Elyria Swansea has the highest number of marijuana locations and licenses, and the audit of the marijuana tax money says $59 million of it goes into the general fund. That's money that is not being, 21 million goes to the related marijuana support services. I think that the city, AE suggested National Western, kicking in something, as a jump start. I think the city can do something too and kick in something significant as a jump start to show their commitment about community benefit and not relying on public charity, which is that's another way that you can really call the roundup. When I give that, it's a donation, it's a charity, but I think the Community Investment Fund needs more, and we need to have that figured out by community input. And the other thing, one resident does not constitute equity on that governance. However you want to constitute, if you don't, we could have 3. And if we decide we want to have 2 residents and a business owner, I really don't think that business owners should be neglected in that, because there are many of us who have been in Glowville, Elyria, Swansea for a long time and have supported community efforts and do make a contribution. So again, we have lots of discussions and unanswered questions here, and I don't know how this is all going to get solved today to be able to present to City Council in 2 weeks. So again, that goes back to really giving us time to, if whoever the authority is that is in charge of this framework agreement will allow community input to be integrated in this before it's presented to City Council.
Tracy's go. Here. Tracy.
Hi everybody, I'm Tracy Weil from the Brino Art District, and I would support the roundup because I think it's something on the table now that we can do right away, and logistically it's going to be a little bit of a nightmare to kind of pull off, frankly, from a person who is in the event business, but I think there are ways that we can kind of pull through that, and actually starting it now is really enticing. I would like to volunteer my time on this committee as a representative to work with Councilwoman Ortega's office on the Coliseum idea. I think there's a lot of guts to that idea. I think it's something we can do right now. So I just want to throw my hat into the ring for that particular experience.
Nola?
So I just want to kind of throw my support in a bunch of different things that have been said. I do agree with some of the sentiments of what Candy said, that I think there should be a city commitment, and I don't know if that's 2C funds or what that looks like, but there's a crisis right now in global responsia. A study just came out that the GS Coalition sponsored that says that 88% of the residents of the neighborhood are at risk of being displaced. This is a crisis. And it's partially caused by the National Western, and because of the public investment here, the price is raising in the neighborhood. And we need to address this, we need to address it right now. And I think that the Community Investment Fund should have been started a long time ago, and I think we all think that here. And it should be a significant amount of money. So if we're talking about $58,000, that's not worth the trouble. It's not worth the time that it would take for the community to get together and figure out how to spend it. I mean, we need to be talking about a significant amount of money. The most guy's getting me here. And also, you know, the National Western's bringing, would you say in your presentation, like 12,000 jobs to the neighborhood, or 10,000, something like that, over the next, in the near future? In Kelly's presentation at Ludi, he was talking about how many jobs, but that's great. Where are all those people going to live? And they're going to want to live here. So this is directly connected to the future of this whole area, including the National Western. We need housing, we need affordable housing. And this needs to be addressed now. So I think there needs to be a commitment for that, but just in regards to kind of what AE was suggesting, what if there was, along with this, an extra commitment letter that did describe some of these things that are potential other sources, or next steps in how are we coming to some sort of community benefits agreement? How are we getting to these next steps? Because I feel like we've been talking about community benefits and it keeps being on the agenda, but we never actually talk about it. We've never gotten through that, and that's, to me, the most important part of this group even existing. And we still don't have an agreement, we still don't have anything in writing. So that's my thing on there. The other points are just, I'm curious, I want to know more about the connection between the Community Investment Fund and this foundation. I think Mickey's going to talk about this more, but I agree with there not being enough reps on the board, and whatever the steering committee is, I don't fully understand, and there's no community representation on that. And then the selection of the CEO and director, I think community members should be involved in that.
At the last meeting, I made reference to the campus development section, paragraph 70 on page 30, and that's in tab 5. And it basically provides the city shall contract with qualified professional service providers and construction contractors to accomplish the following initial campus development. 1, completion of the campus placemaking study. 2, the campus design and construction standards. 3, infrastructure and construction phasing plans. 4, design construction of the campus infrastructure, including roads, utilities, parks, plazas, parking structures, and lots, and other campus-wide infrastructure as identified in the National Western Capital Build Program baseline book as approved and amended from time to time by SteerCom. And next, design and construction of new buildings listed in the baseline schedule. When I brought this up last time, I was told that although this referred to the city, the section that refers to the steer committee really provided the opportunity for other agents, other people to get involved. I guess my concern at that point was it didn't say the authority would be responsible. This is the essence to me of what we're doing, what we're building. And it then makes a reference to the steer committee, which is defined in paragraph 6, and doesn't include any community representation. So I would like to understand more how the community can be involved in these critical decisions. This is what physically the National Western is going to be, and I don't see anything in here which allows the community to have the participation.
Kelly, you want to?
Sure. David.
Hold on.
Yeah, you know, I don't.
Do you want, you want Kelly to respond to Mickey, or you want to go ahead?
I'm just trying to understand if there's
The steer
somewhere
comp.
else that...
David, can you hold on to your question 1 second and pass? Here, Terrence, give him the mic. There's also, while we're at this and you're talking about SteerCom, and one of the questions that AE had is SteerCom subject to, hold on. Number 10, does the Sunshine Law apply to SteerCom?
Here, Maria,
Oh, I'm sorry. So while Kelly's addressing SteerCom, and to Mickey's question, AE had question 10 in the handout that we've got. Kelly, why don't you go ahead and deal with that also, is do the Sunshine Laws apply to the SteerCom?
So they're going to do that, start with that.
Okay. So the answer to that is that SteerCom is a committee essentially held by the city because those contracts, this is going to relate to Mickey's question. And so it is, the SteerCom is absolutely subject to Cora.
I'm sorry, can you please repeat that?
I'm sorry, I used to the Colorado Open Records Act, sorry.
But I think I think what AE is trying to get at is not whether you can summon public records, it's whether you can attend the meeting of the SteerCom. Correct? AE?
Correct. So the city of Denver has its own open meetings requirements, so it's actually not subject at all. None of the city is subject to the state Sunshine Act. I just want to be clear about that. We are subject to the Colorado Open Records Act. The city's open meetings requirements apply when we have a certain number of elected officials in the same room. And so this meeting is a construction meeting that is not subject to those requirements.
So let me
Answer this question.
let me answer the rest of the question. So if we step back a second and think about, so the role of the city, since the majority of the dollars being expended are through the 2C funds, right? The city will, through city contracts, through the public works procurement process, via our office, the Mayor's Office of the National Western Center. So we're acting, the Mayor's Office of the National Western Center is acting as the owner's rep. That's a term in the construction field, right? We're representing the city through NewCo to do the day-to-day functions of doing these procurements through city agencies, and that agency will be Public Works. So we will issue those procurement documents for the selection of design firms and ultimately the construction firms that will implement those design contracts. The authority's job is they're a client. They're the city's client. So as these new buildings come online, we will walk those new buildings or facilities with the authority staff, and we will turn those buildings over to the public authority to operate and maintain and provide campus-wide services for the day-to-day operation of the campus. Okay?
I think
Here, Mickey, Terrence is going.
my concern is really...
I think it's your third question, but go ahead, ask it again so I'm making sure I answer the right question.
Okay. My concern is really, this talks about the design, the development, all of those elements. And it appears as if the city is, it says the city will, and I don't find anywhere else in this document that says this will be subject to the authority, or it talks about the steer committee as having that power, but on the steer committee, the authority is not a member of the steer committee.
Actually, that is once the president and CEO is hired by the board, by the authority board, the CEO, president and CEO becomes a representative of SteerCom. to represent the operator of the facilities. The part I thought you were going to ask me, Mickey, was around the public process relative to the work we're about ready to commence, which is our placemaking. So how many remember when Eric Anderson, how many months and months did we spend together with Eric Anderson as we went through the master plan? Betty, you were here. Raise your hand. So remember, and you guys, and we had a long list of things that came out of that process. Well, and remember, Eric was here not long ago talking about, because MIG had not been fully under contract yet. They are fully under contract now, and they're going to come back, and we're going to start that process again through the placemaking to have a guided discussion about design standards and guidelines, public realm. What does this place feel like? What's the experience that visitors will have, that residents will have, as we begin to take the master plan, which is way up here, and begin to bring detail to what it feels like. That process has not yet commenced, but absolutely this group, as well as the rest of the city, are going to be going through public meetings to get that feedback as we do that work.
But the only reference to design is really right here. What you're saying is a process which is not defined anywhere in this agreement. In other words, you're saying our participation will be at one of these meetings where we'll talk about what we would like the campus to be, but there's nothing in there that really gives us any authority. Even the head, once the head of the authority is elected, he's not even on the committee. It's, if you read the definition of the STEM committee, then it's basically the head of CSU, the mayor has 5 construction representatives. I just want to be sure that the critical fact of what this campus is really we're going to participate in. We've been going through this process for years, and I just want to know that we're not going to lose it, and it appears to be that way here.
I just want to add to what Kelly's response was. I think the reason you don't see a more full discussion of that in this document is that, remember, this document is not the guiding document for the construction so much as it is a business relationship among the 3 parties about who's going to take responsibility for what. So what this document does is give the city the responsibility for that physical build, but the city's going to do that physical build in a way that you've seen us do the master plan, and that Kelly was talking about doing the placemaking study with MIG, which we have done. You know, you've seen in the neighborhood plans and then in the master plan, and then that will go forward in the placemaking study. So I just wanted to give you the legal answer too about why there's not more process in here.
My question is, in looking at the steer committee, why can't there be a reference and subject to or make a reference to the fact that the community meetings will inform that steer committee? It's just out there. The essence of this whole development really is kind of left up in the air.
And Mickey, there will be much more coming out besides this framework agreement to inform how that public process works. This legal document, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to put it in this legal document. That's
okay.
That's the
my
legal
question
response to
is
that.
when and where will it appear?
So the what is the schedule that we will release for placemaking to commence this fall. I mean, and we can probably get Eric to get that. We can get you a draft of what that looks like now. That we could get Maria and team to send out to this group, so you can see that at least the next 6 to 12, let's say next 6 to 10 months, what that looks like in terms of the deliverables that the placemaking team will put in motion, very much with the input of this body, the CAC, and other public meetings across the city to make sure we're getting the input we need for the placemaking exercise.
Kelly, can I just piggyback on this one quick? Sure. Why this is so important is because there's going to be so many different construction projects going on simultaneously in these neighborhoods, and the coordination with the community around how all of those are being talked about and how circulation in the neighborhood, access egress, bus circulation, making sure that emergency vehicles can get into the community, all of those things need to be done in a collaborative way with the other projects that are going to impact these same neighborhoods. So that's why having that direct interface with the community being ongoingly involved in the conversation is so important.
And we agree.
Okay.
David, then AE.
David,
has a microphone.
and then I'm going to take a facilitator prerogative because I want to get through your questions, AE.
All right. I don't want to be the burden of doom and gloom, but we're moving fast. We have a lot of projects, and I want to go back to yesteryear when we were promised, when RTD built the light rail maintenance facility in Globeville, that the Globeville people would have first crack at any jobs. Well, I put out the word to everybody I knew. Well, guess what? I don't know one person that got employed in RTD. And Kevin Flynn was part of RTD. That he's on city council now. I think we need some answers from them, and we have to watch out so this doesn't get lost too. Because that it happened so fast that everything got lost, and we went able to plan, and we started here. I mean, there's been a lot of promises, and nobody monitored what was going on in those situations, and we don't want to lose this again. And I think that we're all worried about that. I know John is, Mickey is, and we need some accountability. And I'd still like to talk to Kevin Flynn and ask him what happened. Anyway, that's all I got.
So, could I just say something before you do? AE has a series of questions. We've only answered 2 out of the 11. And actually, we haven't come to closure on, you didn't get much of a response on your proposal. Can we, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, somebody.
Right here.
Oh, thank you. So, thank you, I'm sorry. Here's my suggestion. Let's go through some of these questions. Some of these questions I think can be very easily answered by the city team. And let's get through these, because I don't think we ought not to have these questions surfaced here tonight. Okay, I don't think we ought to have an offline meeting with you to go through these questions. I think this discussion ought to happen within the CAC.
I absolutely do not want an offline conversation with me. The purpose in submitting them is because they're of general interest. I do want to point out for those that were just listening about the subcommittee that question number 10 takes you right to the definition of the steering committee, if you want to see what that is. I am to framework the questions, and I think it would be helpful to make sure they're all answered, and I'd like them to be answered in writing after this meeting if we don't get to them for general. I think they could help. But if you go to there's a reference on tab 5, one of the questions, tab 5, the required subcommittee, question number 7. I'd like to get some response to this to start out with and go through the questions. There's 2 really important questions. That is a required subcommittee, and it stipulates about making sure that okay, let me just say off the top of it, there's two important questions. I'm going to shut up. This will be the last thing I say. Anybody who hasn't said anything, please realize we're going to run out of time. There are 2 important questions on there, one of which has to do with the subcommittee and can't we have the local representative on there. The other has to do with the definition of what happens to the vote if there's a vacancy on the board. And I think that formula needs to change. These are, and I just want to say to people, these are circumstances where I am specifically asking for wording to be improved in these documents. And I want us to find out if this is possible, because we've got this preamble document and then we've got the bylaws. And so can we make that distinction? So whatever you can do to get through these questions, I think would be great.
Okay, so one suggestion is that we could do is some of these, first of all, I actually think if we give the mic to the city team and we read these questions, I think we can actually, and then we will follow up in writing to do that. I think we can do these questions pretty quickly because I think they can be clarified. And so we had to do it. Where's the other mic?
Right there.
They're set up to take.
And then I do think the ones that are more lengthier discussion, like question 7, the required subcommittee, let's try, if I could get the city team to start at the top, okay, and say, the first one being, for those of you who, I think everybody has a sheet, but the initial president and CEO election, the question that, question one is that IE had is, please elaborate under what would cause a national search not to be in the best interest of hiring the CEO.
Sure, let me just clarify. What we're talking about is tab 5, which is the framework agreement, page 12.
I have it on tab 2, page 2, no?
That's in the summary, I think, so I just wanted to point out where it is exactly in the document. It's tab 5, page 12. So what the document says is that for the first CEO, the city, the CSU, and the WSSA shall each nominate one representative to a committee to conduct a national search. What we're trying to do is get out in front of this so that we can get a board stood up and present them with some options sooner than later so that they don't have to go through a 12-month process after they're formed. After that is what AE's question is about. After that, it says, any subsequent CEO shall be selected by the board after the board, and then it has a list of things that the board has to do. It has to develop a job description consistent with the powers and responsibilities of the authority. It has to conduct a pay survey, and then it has to conduct a national search for the candidates unless the board determines that a national search is not in the best interest of the authority, the campus, or the campus development. And I think what AE, what your question is simply is, when might that be? This is just an escape valve for the authority board because they may decide 20 years from now, right? This is a very long agreement. They may decide years from now that there's somebody that the board already knows or that is nominated or that folks are comfortable with that ought to be the next executive director. They don't have to conduct 20 or 25 years from now a national search. That's all it means.
All right, question.
So question, oh, do you want me to go?
Yeah,
okay,
keep going.
So question 2, does the authority have any influence should the city move to dispose of land at the National Western Center? What are the controls in general in the city's right to sell the National Western Center land? So there are 2 important controls. The first, I'm sorry, let me give you a citation also. This comes from the citation that is on your sheet is from the summary. So let me tell you where it is in the document. It's again under tab 5, page 24. And this is under subparagraph D, campus property. And what this says is that the city can't dispose of any campus property except as mutually determined between the city and the authority. So that's an important note. That's the first note. And then second, the city cannot dispose of essential new facilities, or key facilities rather. Key facilities are defined as the stockyards, the livestock center, the equestrian center, and then when they're built, the arena and the expo hall. And that is because it is essential to the production of the stock show to have those facilities, so nobody can sell them. And then also, in addition to that, the city is obligated under the resolution that the state put in place for the Regional Tourism Act award to generate tourism from those facilities. So the city will not sell those facilities.
Keep going.
Sorry. 3, is 2C a tab section in the framework book a la HB 15-1344? Did I miss it? Should it be? It is not, and the reason it was not included but 1344 was included is because 1344 includes requirements specifically of the city and its partners, specifically of CSU and the city to tap into those dollars to get this is the $250 million that the state is making available to CSU for their facilities. So there are specific requirements in 1344 referenced in the document, and that's why it's included as an exhibit. 2C was not included as an exhibit because there are not specific requirements in 2C to tap into those dollars. Voters approve those, and it's not conditional. But the master plan is included in your binder for reference. Question 4, tab 5, page 13, the paragraph starting, all subsequent appointees are reappointed directors. Question, what is the qualifying criteria for and the purpose of the no-term limited designated directors? This was of particular concern to WSSA because they have a president and CEO and or a chairman of the board, thank you, who may be long-serving. But that is also true of CSU, who may want their president to, they may have the same president for years on end, and they may want their president to be on this board. So the intent there is to create an opportunity for there to be longevity for folks who have expertise, particularly in the National Western Center.
It is, I'm not going to speak on behalf of Pat, but it's been the WSSA has decided that their CEO and president will always be in the authority. And it could very well be that a CEO and president could survive. The board members of the stock show have term limits.
Correct.
So they can't be there forever. But the CEO could, in fact, and it's not unusual for a CEO of an organization like that to be there for 20 years. So that's part of our issue.
Okay. Question 5. This is under tab 5, page 13, section C, successor directors. And the question is, do the directors replaced midterm have to be approved by city council? And the answer is yes. Any appointment by the mayor to the board must be approved by city council. Question 6, tab 5, page 14, regarding the paragraph above under F, subparagraph F, removal of directors. Your question was, in the event of a vacancy in the local area director position, which I will just note is now known as the GES director. We have replaced that throughout, so that there's a new definition that's now GES director. And we've changed the language similar to what we discussed at the last meeting to be a resident. In the event of a vacancy of the local area director position, how is that vote assured until the vacancy is filled? Given that there is only one such designate, it does not have a remedy parallel to the 6 city, 2 CSU, and 2 WSSA appointees in the formula. And that's true because, I'll take just a second to explain, sort of if you haven't dug into the document, like AE, I'm sorry? Sure. Sure. So what happens under the document is that if an appointment has not been, if someone, for example, if somebody, if a board member resigns, if WSSA has an appointee who resigns, then the vote of that one remaining director until they fill the second slot is weighted such that they have their 21% representation on the board. And the problem here is that there isn't somebody else to take that vote to advance that because there's one representative. And so we didn't want the mayor's representatives to necessarily be the voice of that GES director. So I think Crystal and I have been talking, we think that's a great question. And so we need to think about that a little bit. I think that's a really good question. And I don't have a good answer for you about what a solution ought to be, but let us think about that.
Suggestions, anybody that has suggestions can give them.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
It's a really fair,
Yeah.
it's a really fair question. I think we appreciate you bringing that up, and we need to figure it out.
So we'll talk more about it in addition to the...
And can you guys be sure to think about why GES is being treated as one entity?
Can you be sure to also consider why GES is being treated as one entity, one stakeholder, when it's 3 separate neighborhoods?
We appreciate that.
So tab 6, tab 5, page 14, I'm sorry, question 7, I'm moving on. Tab 5, page 16, regarding the required subcommittee. And your question is, would it be advisable to include, and I'm just going to call it now, the GES director, to assure alignment of facilities use with the interests of the adjacent neighborhoods, in particular impacts from traffic, parking, noise control, and to spotlight thinking towards facilities using enriching local enterprises. So let me just make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. On the bottom of page 16 under tab 5, there's a required subcommittee. It's the only one required in here because for a thoughtful reason. We want the authority to decide what subcommittees it needs to have. But the required subcommittee is the authority shall create a board subcommittee for the purpose of aligning the interests of CSU, the WSSA, and all tenants to maximize the year-round use and revenue of the campus. So the purpose of that subcommittee is to make sure that the authority is using the campus as often as possible, developing as much revenue as possible, so as to not create a need for the partners to continue to dedicate revenue to their own revenue, to the authority over time. So that's really the point of that subcommittee. The reason that no particular board members were identified as being a part of that subcommittee was because, again, we are trying to give the authority. We really want the authority to have power here, and that's why none of them are designated as required members of that subcommittee.
And there's a variety of examples around the country. The local example is what's called the Alliance, which is at the Convention Center, where the Convention Center Hotel, the Convention Center team, Visit Denver, and Centerplate, which is the food purveyor, are aligned around making sure that not only are they serving their guests, but this whole premise of how do we make sure the venue collectively, because it requires the food and beverage operator, requires the convention center building itself and the hotel all to cooperate. And that has been a really successful model for the convention center and its partners. This is an even more interesting partnership, and this is all about creating a collaborative environment to make sure this place is busy.
Question, keep going.
Okay. Question 8, tab 5, page 18, section Q, staffing. Question, when hiring administrative staff to manage and operate the campus hereunder, why is it okay for the authority to, quote, give preference in hiring to current WSSA and Denver Arts and Revenue staff employed at the campus as of the effective date? End quote. This excludes new blood via interest from qualified candidates, including from within the GES neighborhoods. The real point of this AE was to make sure that current employees of those employers who are doing the job that the authority will take over, right? Because the facilities are going to be transferred from the control of the stock show to the control of the authority. And what we don't want to have happen is that folks who are currently doing those jobs to necessarily be replaced. If they want to apply for those jobs, that they're given special consideration because they have been doing those jobs for their current employer. And that's what we thought was fair. Okay.
Question.
Yeah.
That doesn't preclude anyone living in any of the neighborhoods for pursuing an opportunity there.
Right. Just so everybody can hear, John's question was that doesn't preclude anybody from the neighborhoods for applying for jobs, and that is certainly true, and obviously a goal of the project.
And that the simple reason for that is, you know, these folks that have been either working in the Coliseum or working for WSSA and the current venues have developed a certain level of expertise about the function of the events that happen in those buildings. And again, you don't want that expertise to walk out the door when the facilities are turned over from either city control or stock show control over to the authority to leave. I mean, there's been lots of investment in those experts, and you would like to see them retained to continue their skills.
Question 9, tab 5, page 57, section 10, intellectual property. Question, is this the section where a recital could be added to the authority and the equity partners may approve and allocate revenue sharing from NWC generated intellectual property and other products? How could this then be carried over into the language for the community investment fund on page 63, same tab? So we've had a lot of conversations about possible funding sources for the Community Investment Fund, and this is one AE that you brought up in the last 2 meetings also that I think is really interesting. The section about intellectual property in the existing framework agreement is about the partners sharing intellectual property, and by that we really mean not intellectual property that generates money. We're talking about intellectual property that we're going to share so that brochures can be produced, so that the authority can use the trademark of the National Western Stock Show, so that it can use the city's D, so that it can use CSU's RAM on the promotional materials, marketing materials, and however else they may need to use that. And you'll note that that language also pushes all those decisions into future agreements,
because we don't know what we need to share yet. As we get further down this path, we'll know more about what intellectual property we need to share. So I don't think it goes in that section. What I do think, though, is that as we've identified a whole bunch of opportunities for the Community Investment Fund, this is an opportunity that we need to talk to you about more, and that certainly the city's probably not going to be generating income-producing intellectual property on the site. And so I think that's something that we really need to sit down with our partners and talk about how that might work. But we don't have answers to that right now. Yeah, I think we actually have talked about 10 and 11.
Okay, any other questions, thoughts? AE, did that cover a lot of your issues?
I think it gives the foundation of understanding for conversations to continue, and I would like the language to be looked at, especially on the representation of the agency.
Oh, sorry, I didn't even know I had one, sorry. Other questions, thoughts, comments?
This is Tom Anthony, and been overpassed by that microphone so far.
Okay.
But I don't think I need it. I brought up to this committee last winter a brand new study by the Colorado Foundation that said there were kids in our neighborhood were 500% more affected by other kids in other Denver neighborhoods with lead in their bloodstream that was damaging to their brains. 500%. Now, I brought this up to this committee back then. I have one question. Because, of course, our two schools are in the bottom 0.5% nationally, environmentally. One question. Did anybody follow up on that? Because I have sent many emails to many individuals here about it. Did anybody follow up one time on that? I have a question. Answer me.
I did.
You did? Great. AE, what did you find out?
Well, as far as I could go in my limited time and my focus is I educated myself regarding how do the metabolites of lead get into the bodies of people and what is the ramification for that in relationship to construction, and can the monitoring systems that they're talking about with some of these atmospherics in construction, for example, be favorable in assisting us with doing the safeguards that we need to do, etc. So if we want to talk about the scientific stuff, I don't think that's something we can do here. But I do think that it's something where vigilance is necessary, and I think that there's discussions going on inside the Environmental Health Department, and I found there were a lot of educational materials coming out, both in English and Spanish, through the schools, having to do with the education of the impact of materials, both because of industrial environments and household materials in dangers to children and pets, based on how it's taken into the body, etc. I don't know much about the mitigation beyond that, but that's what I can tell you that I did. And as far as the National Western Center goes, I'm not sure what the situation is, but the soils, there's been thousands, the soil studies have to be done, the way the construction is handled, the way the soils are being removed. We all have to be vigilant about the construction sites. There's been people that have been going out on tours of these areas, and I think that there's kind of a hum, and I'm sure what you said contributed to it. If you have specific mechanisms you'd like to give for people to take action, great. That's what I can offer.
Drew has a...
Tom, I do remember your email, and it has been in the back of my mind for many months since you sent it. It's very problematic. Why are lead levels 5 times the national average in children in GES? I don't have an answer for you. It is something we ought to be finding out. There is a community advisory group for the work at Globeville Landing Outfall that meets once a month, and these kind of things are discussed. Lead is being tested. We are in a super fund, so I don't know how. It's certainly a very troublesome problem. 5 times the level, something's wrong. I don't know.
Bloodstream is getting into the breathing
Well, lead is known, I mean, I'm not going to get into the science, but it's known to be, it's irreversible. And it's, well, I did, Tom, so if you, just because I didn't respond to your email,
Sorry for being
didn't, does it?
so loud and obnoxious about the question, but once a kid's brain is damaged with lead, their IQ never gets up where it should be. I mean, it's a permanent damage.
I think that's a totally legitimate point we ought to be searching for the answer for. I will say that one of my big concerns has been the scale and number of projects and the speed with which they are being pursued in these communities is unprecedented, probably in the nation. This is the most polluted zip code in the country. It's a Superfund site, and yet all of this lay dormant for a century, and then all of a sudden we have all this work happening right here. So I don't know, I think we ought to be more careful. That's all I will say.
They got $300 million tax year for financing, on to build schools, and I don't know, rec center, parks, everything. We still have the same schools we had 100 years ago, basically. I mean, Swansea is a little newer, but it's basically exactly the same place it was 100 years ago. So, I mean, we're talking about deep infrastructure issues and a health emergency as far as I'm concerned. It's an emergency. Emergency.
I agree, Tom.
Other questions, comments?
So what does it take to do the delay? What, is there a vote here that happens?
You guys, so what are your thoughts and how do you want to proceed?
May I just take a stab at that? I started with this conversation with kind of a letter that INC wrote, and our big concern was, what is the hurry? Is it possible to get 1 month delay instead of filing September 7th, which is 1 week from today, beginning a 1 month, 30-day period by which this has to be agreed to by council, or by default it becomes automatically accepted if council doesn't respond in 30 days. Can we have more time for public discussion?
John?
I'd like to hear from our council person.
Thanks, John. I'm here actually to listen. I think Councilwoman Ortega and I just talked about this issue as well, and you know, Councilwoman Ortega, I'll let her speak on it. To me, it sounds like there's some division on should we do a delay or not. I think it's about specificity, and there are two individuals that I've heard today with specified changes to this specific contract. And I just wrote them down here. Actually, I didn't get all of yours, but AE had some very specific issues that we need to address, and I would like to get a response from the board on those two issues. One, broaden revenue streams into GES for the first meeting. That the first meeting the authority has, they talk about broadening revenue streams. Two, seed $500,000 or $1 million from into a community investment fund. I don't know if you specified that to National Western Center.
I want to stipulate I strongly support what Debbie Ortega has proposed as a precedent for activating the footprint here and she's talking about something that's very real and very much in the model of benefiting the neighborhoods from the revenue model. What I'm proposing by immediate cash into an account, into a mechanism, is to seed this such that we can finally do it right, where we're reaching everyone in the neighborhoods to get feedback coming in for greater creativity of immediate needs and more inclusionary ideas. Give us some resources. I'll recuse myself, let me say one thing, I'll recuse myself personally from receiving any resources in any direction having to do with this. I want this to be very clear. I would love at least a mailing to every single impacted resident and interior-owned business to do a series of gatherings and brainstormings of how could a community investment fund be used attached to the National Western Center. I think that there are other ways that other revenues that aren't generating from here, like marijuana, etc. That's valuable too, but we're here as the CAC to make the National Western Center accountable to the greatest aspirations and benefit of everybody affected.
Okay, those are two things that I heard, right? And I've heard some other smatterings of, hey, can we get more members on the board? I have heard that. And so I don't want to do a delay if we're not going to have any specific detail that we're going to change the contract by, right? So if that's the specific detail, I want to have a vote on that. I want to hear what the committee has to say. That's my perspective.
So I just wanted to share my thoughts about the conversation that Councilman Brooks and I were having. And the fact that we are already tweaking the document that went to City Council, and there will be some changes to the language. I, for one, want to see the language before it's finalized. I'm hearing, different input and conversations, but if there are still some additional things that need to be resolved, you want to do that as early on in this process as possible, not after all the approval processes before City Council have gone through. And I know this isn't the last of those, but if a short delay that allows some of those additional things to be finalized can be afforded, I think that's important. I don't think anybody's looking for any long-term delay because a lot of work has gone into all of this. We've been at this table for a long time, but John, to your point, you want these things resolved as much as possible up front rather than waiting and leaving them to chance or to be resolved at some later time. So if there's a way that we can come back together in another 2 weeks, next week, this weekend is a holiday weekend, some people are taking that off, but if we can commit to be back here in 2 weeks to walk through some of those additional things and people can come with concrete ideas, I think that gives us an opportunity to really refine those additional concerns and then move it forward. I know that we have a temporary or a tentative public hearing date, but if these can be resolved, I think that goes an additional step further in just continuing to build on this relationship that's been built with National Western and the community.
Kelly, did you want to make a clarification now? Or
Yeah, I mean, and this has been great. I think the team, there's been a lot of good dialogue tonight, and for a 100-year deal, right? You're without being too prescriptive, you're trying to at least provide guidance, right? Intent, we call it intent language. But the point I wanted to make is related to, I've heard the number of 58,000 thrown out by a couple folks, and that was an illustrative example relative to what the roundup could generate for a 2-week event that was only based on what you might see out of the stock show for the 2 weeks it would be in place, using very conservative assumptions about what it could generate. And so think about now year-round activity and what the potential is for year-round activity. So it was just an illustrative number to say this thing has a lot of potential to generate a significant amount of money once not truly once the campus is fully operational. And obviously you've got commitments from the city, from ABD, and now the stock show to sit down and say, what can we do to get this thing going faster? And we've always talked about collectively, and I've heard many of us talk about this idea of piloting some of these ideas. So what are the things we can do now to fine-tune and refine the idea so that when the campus is operational, we are benefiting from all that knowledge gained from the early tests we put in place now.
John.
At this point, I think I want to take advantage of our political situation. I'm aging on this committee, and we need to get this thing moving. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. I don't see anything in there that prohibits us from doing that and gaining whatever concessions, if you want to call them that. But it behooves us to take that task on. So the political time clock I leave it up to our elected officials as to how you deal with that. But I'm ready to go now, and I think everyone on this committee mostly feel the same way.
Can I say, I heard what Councilwoman Ortega said. I would be willing to meet next week. We're off next week. We're in an off session for City Council next week. Yep. And so all next week, Councilwoman Ortega just said she'll be willing to meet. The following Monday is a 1-hour courtesy public hearing. And I feel like we can iron out some of these issues before then.
Let's go for it then.
Why wouldn't we wait for the month after the public hearing to incorporate what people bring up in the public hearing?
Say that again?
In other words, the council doesn't have to vote.
Why wouldn't we wait until the public has a chance to comment before we finalize and give it to council? Why wouldn't we set the date 30 days after the public hearing and work on it from between the public hearing and the end of the 30 days so that we can incorporate what concerns people have?
That's not our structure at all. And we only have a 30-day shot clock on contracts when they're filed, which will be filed on Thursday. So the other issue is we brought all of these books and we met with this committee twice, which I'm just telling you, on any billion-dollar project, we have not done that at all. And I understand what you all are saying now about some of the issues of not feeling a part of the revenue going forward. And I feel that, and that's why I'm saying let's figure that out next week. And I think we have the time to do it next week, and City Council can hear it the following week, and we can amend, have a conversation with Kelly and the administration and see if we can get this done.
I would suggest that whatever is said or is done at that next meeting is put in writing in some place that we can see it,
Right.
or it's part of the public record, or something that if it's not in this actual agreement, that it's someplace and not just another conversation and then never.
It would
That's
also,
the next step.
but it would also be really helpful, because we had 2 meetings, and Candy, you weren't here at the first meeting where we actually took the binders to this committee before it went to City Council, okay, where we were very specific about what the schedule is, and the charter is very specific as to what you have to do on a contract. Not that we can do anything about it at this point, because then that would require a vote of the people. It would be really helpful, though, for you all to send stuff to Liz and myself and Terrence ahead of time. Vern was very good at sending us his comments before the last meeting, okay, that was shared. AE is obviously done today's, but it would really be helpful. Yes, Nancy sent some, Vern sent some. It would really be helpful if you could get those comments as soon as possible as to what you want to do that, so we can at least structure an agenda, okay, and be able to go through those issues, because I think a lot of these issues have similar families, and we can tackle those issues by some sort of subject theme as we go through this to be able to do that. And yes, Noah, we would agree that we would, I mean, what I'd like to do, as we talked about it, is Jen went very articulately through all these questions, but we need to reduce it to writing and get it back out to everybody so everybody understands, because I know we have a tape, we have all that, but we'll need to do that. But it would be really helpful if you guys would send in additional thoughts, questions, so we can structure an agenda.
Vern had a comment.
Nancy.
I don't know how to articulate this, but okay, we're going to come together next week and we're going to kick around different ideas and suggestions. And how are any decisions going to be determined from that? Who knows how many NWC-CAC members can come next week? So again, just like we had a discussion today, and there are differences here. How will decisions be made? Will it even matter what we decide? Will that be incorporated? Well, who will determine that?
You could come next week, raise your hand.
Depends on what day.
Thursday.
Thursday.
Isn't what we're talking, Thursday or Wednesday? Thursday? The 7th?
We're going to have something more than just water.
Yeah.
All right, John, I promise I'll bring you something besides water.
Wow, John.
I do think, in all fairness though, Nancy, to your question, some of these changes, particularly if they involve financial commitments, have to go back to the equity partners in some way. I mean, Pat's here, unfortunately CSU could not be here tonight, but for example, I can assure you that the discussion of the startup funds, because we don't know when the authority will be self-standing and self-supportive on its own, was a pretty heated discussion among the equity partners because of how much money the stock show and CSU will have to bring to the table on top of the $125 million that they're already doing, right? So I do think in all fairness, I want to make sure that everybody understands, and we'll have to bring CSU at the day to make sure CSU is here next week, okay, to be able to do that, because some of these issues, particularly if they touch financial, we'll have to go back to the equity partners. And notwithstanding the mayor of Denver, but also the equity partners to be able to do that. All right, do we have an agreement that we're going to meet next Thursday?
Thursday, what time?
What, do you guys want to start earlier, like at 5 or 4:30, 5? Or is some people going to have challenges getting here by 5 or 5:30? Can we start at 5? Everybody, Vern, can you be here? Okay.
Keep us on task.
Larry,
Keep us
John,
on task when we get here.
Jim? Right, okay. Thoughts? Tracy, can you be here? One? Okay. Guys? Huh?
I'll bring food.
You'll bring food? Okay.
And I'll be out of town, but I'll send some Mad Dog over for John.
So, we will not be out of town, so we will be here. Please, can we have a request that by the end of business, how about by noon on Tuesday?
Yes.
We get your comments in so we can have time to put out an agenda, structure an agenda, and work it through. We will make sure that all equity partners are present to be able to be here and have a discussion, because it will be helpful, particularly if we're talking about money, that the equity partners have to be present for this discussion. Okay? Any other words of wisdom before we call our night? Are the Broncos winning?
We need to make a quick announcement just logistically based on council, just to preserve our timing if we're able to iron things out.
Because
if we're not meeting until Thursday night, we have to file Thursday morning.
Yes, Debbie.
She's going to ask this
Meeting on Thursday evening.
You're going to ask exactly what they were going to. Is the bill going to get filed on Thursday?
Yeah. So that's the issue.
I will leave that up to this side of the table to answer.
I think given the input that you and Councilman Brooks just had, that what we will do is file on Thursday, and to preserve the opportunity to move forward with the public hearing that is scheduled on the following Monday. And then if we have to rethink that on Thursday night, Friday morning, then we will.
Then we'll pull it. What does that mean, rethink that?
You do know that.
So that the changes could be made, and then it could be refiled, right?
Yes.
Did you all hear that?
Say that
What are the
again.
chances of that happening?
The question was, what does it mean to rethink that? And that means the bill could be pulled. If it gets filed, and Thursday evening, we've got some significant changes to the document, then it could just be pulled and not move forward with the filing while we get those changes resolved.
Unless we meet Wednesday. We want to ask people to meet Wednesday, it's easier to meet
We
Wednesday.
can meet earlier. I mean, we can meet Tuesday or Wednesday instead.
Yeah, and not have to go through the headache. Maybe we can meet Wednesday.
My only challenge with meeting Tuesday is how are we going to get people's input in enough time to create an agenda that's worthwhile? I'm fine with Wednesday.
Meet
I'm fine. Who can meet Wednesday?
It matters for the city council process. It just allows us to really address these issues in a different way on our
Councilman
end.
Brooks can't do it. I got a lot of no's on this side.
That was the only reason why I was suggesting at least a short delay. So we could resolve these
If
things.
Councilman Brooks can't be here to be a part of this thing, then it's no need us doing it.
Can you Skype?
I'll figure it out.
How many of you can be here on Wednesday? Yes.
We lost people. We lost a bunch of people. I think we need to stick with Thursday. We lost a bunch of people.
Guys, we need a direction here.
Why can't you wait to file until after next Thursday's meeting?
Because we're not going to have a public hearing on the
Can you give us
11th
permission?
if you don't have a bill. Hold on, it's the technicality of moving a bill through the process.
What was presented.
I
think that's about, I need to, I would need to, I would want him, but I think that's the process.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, can you guys
I'll do
clarify?
Wednesday.
I think we can do Thursday.
Okay, we're sticking to Thursday.
I think we can do Thursday.
We just had it 5.
Nola's bringing food. Some of us may bring other things than food. Can we start at 5?
Okay, oh, okay. Oh, that's not bad.
All right, anything else for the good of the order?
The score of the Broncos game really is 3-2 Broncos.
We just have to have the council.
All right, guys,
Back in the field goal.
thank you.
No, I don't think anything.
No, we had that.
9 to 5.
Parents.
No, that's exactly right.
No, this is all Maria's turn tonight.
I think we need to talk about that.
You running with me?
We need to have a conversation.
I have an idea.
About Paul, you and I are just going to debate about it, because it's coming our way. So by the way, I tried to look up one of the things we need to do is to do something on the incentive fund, because it's like we have any money for a surcharge. Time is not freaking up.
My suggestion is, remember how Bev Bledsoe gets cards? Let everybody spout, everybody create ideas.
This is going to be like,
And at the end, he said, why don't we do this? And everybody just folded like sheep.
You're welcome. You want me to give you a ride?
I have my car.
Okay. Let me show you how I feel, how I get out of bed every morning.
Oh my God.